At my grandson's baptism, my daughter pointed to the back row. You sit there. At the party, she laughed and told everyone, she's only here because she paid for half the celebration. I smiled, silent. The next day, I signed papers that changed everything. My house, my will, my legacy, gone from her grasp. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The morning sunlight spilled through lace curtains as Eleanor Carter stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing the wrinkles from her navy blue dress. It was the same dress she had worn to Natalie's wedding 12 years ago, a dress chosen carefully, one she believed carried memories of love and family unity. Today was supposed to be a celebration, her grandson Ethan's baptism, and she wanted to look her best. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the delicate chain of pearls around her neck. On the bed lay a small white gift bag, inside it a silver cross she had saved for months to buy. It wasn't extravagant, but it meant something. Everything about this day meant something to her. She arrived at St. Mary's Cathedral 30 minutes early, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she stepped into the grand sanctuary. The air was cool, perfumed with lilies and baby's breath. White ribbons draped along the pews, sunlight pouring through stained glass and pools of colors that danced across polished wood. Eleanor's heart swelled with quiet pride as she took it all in. She had helped make this day beautiful, contributing far more than she could comfortably afford, just as she had for every milestone in Natalie's life, her quinceañera, her college tuition, her wedding, and now this baptism reception. Mom, you're over there. Natalie's voice came, sharp and efficient, like an event planner directing staff. Eleanor turned, expecting to be guided toward the family rows near the altar. Instead, Natalie's manicured finger pointed to a lonely cluster of chairs behind the last pew. But sweetie, I can barely see from back there. It's fine, you'll see everything you need to see. Natalie was already turning away, her attention fixed on Daniel's family as they swept into the front rows. His mother in a designer suit that probably cost more than Eleanor received in a month from Social Security. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, her pulse a dull roar in her ears, then walked slowly to the back, each step echoing louder than the last. Her seat felt miles from the altar. From here, she could barely make out Ethan's tiny face as the ceremony began. Still, she watched, heart aching, as Natalie cradled the baby in his white christening gown, the gown Eleanor had embroidered by hand during long, quiet evenings. Tears stung her eyes as holy water touched Ethan's forehead, a mix of joy and something she didn't want to name. She gripped her purse tightly, forcing herself to focus on the promise of new beginnings. After the service, the crowd drifted toward the parish hall. Eleanor followed, her excitement flickering back to life at the thought of holding Ethan, of sharing a moment in the celebration she'd helped create. The hall shimmered with elegance, crystal centerpieces, fresh floral arrangements, a towering three-tier cake that must have cost a fortune. Eleanor scanned the tables, expecting to see her name near Natalie and Daniel. It wasn't there. Her name card, Mrs. Eleanor Carter, was tucked away at a small round table near the kitchen door, alongside the elderly church custodian and a woman Eleanor didn't recognize. You looking for your seat, dear? The custodian asked kindly, nodding toward the chair beside him. Guess we're the background folks. Eleanor forced a polite smile and sat down heavily, her purse still clutched like a shield. From here, the family table looked like another world. Crystal glasses clinked as Daniel's parents toasted, praising the wonderful family we're blessed to join. Their words floated across the room, conspicuously void of her name. Then came the cutting of the cake. Laughter rippled through the hall as cameras flashed, capturing Natalie's radiant smile, Daniel's proud stance, and Ethan's tiny fist clutching air. Eleanor rose from her chair, hope stirring. Maybe now she could hold her grandson, maybe pose for one picture to remember this day. But then she heard it. Oh, she's here because she paid for half the party. Natalie's voice carried easily across the polished floors, casual, almost dismissive as she spoke to one of Daniel's cousins. I mean, she wanted to contribute, so we let her. The words struck like a bucket of ice water, seeping through Eleanor's bones until even her breath felt brittle. We let her, as though her sacrifice was some indulgent favor. as though decades of giving were nothing more than a bargaining chip to buy a chair in the shadows. She stood there for a moment, surrounded by laughter and camera flashes, feeling smaller than she ever had in 70 years. It wasn't about money. It had never been about money. This was about respect, about love, about being seen as more than a wallet with legs. Slowly, Eleanor walked back to her table, each step heavier than the last. She picked up her purse, ignoring the custodian's concerned glance, and headed for the exit. No one noticed. No one called after her. Why would they? She was, after all, just the woman who paid for the party. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the church in golden light, but Eleanor felt none of its warmth. She sat in her old Honda for a long time, staring at the cathedral's towering spire. Then, with hands steadier than they'd been in years, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. There was a call she needed to make, one she had postponed for far too long. The woman who had walked into that church was gone. The one sitting behind the wheel now had work to do. The drive home stretched like an endless ribbon of asphalt, every familiar street layered with a strange new weight. Eleanor Carter gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles pale, her breath shallow but steady. The sting from Natalie's words clung to her like smoke, words tossed so casually as though her sacrifices were nothing but a footnote in someone else's perfect script. For 70 years, Eleanor had built her life around the belief that family was sacred, that giving was its own reward. She had lived through decades of long shifts, skipping vacations, secondhand clothes, all so Natalie could have the life Eleanor never had. College tuition, a dream wedding, a honeymoon she couldn't afford to attend but helped finance anyway. And now this. The humiliation burned deeper than she wanted to admit. At first, she told herself she would make tea, climb into bed, and let the ache fade like every other disappointment before. But as she pulled into the cracked driveway of her modest apartment building, something inside her shifted. The quiet acceptance that had defined her for decades no longer fit. She had spent her entire life making things easier for everyone else. Tonight, she would make things right for herself. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets tucked in her drawers, a habit she never abandoned. Eleanor set her purse down on the kitchen table and, without even removing her heels, walked straight to the closet in her bedroom. Her hands brushed past winter coats, sweaters worn thin at the elbows, until they found the old shoebox hidden in the shadows. She carried it to the table and sat. For a long moment, she simply stared at it, her heart pounding like a drumbeat in her ears. Then, with deliberate care, she lifted the lid. Inside lay nearly 3 decades of secrets. Letters, photographs, official documents, all fragments of a life Natalie knew nothing about. Eleanor reached for the first envelope, its edges softened by time, and unfolded the yellowed paper. The handwriting was neat, almost formal. "Señora Carter," it began, "I know this letter may come as a shock, but I believe you have the right to know about Grace." Grace, the name stirred something deep, something tender. Eleanor closed her eyes and let the memories rush in like an unstoppable tide. It had been 28 years ago, when Natalie was just 6. Eleanor had taken a job as a live-in caregiver for an elderly man named Miguel Vasquez. His son, Robert, was fighting a bitter divorce, trying desperately to keep custody of his 3-year-old daughter. Grace, a child with big brown eyes and hair like spun silk, who clung to Eleanor's legs the way only a child who has known too much loss can. Eleanor had never planned to love her, but love, real love, doesn't ask permission. It happens quietly, like rain soaking into thirsty soil. For 6 months, she cared for Grace as if she were her own, reading bedtime stories, soothing her nightmares, braiding her hair in the mornings before Robert rushed to work. When Robert finally won custody and prepared to move across the country for a better job, he made a request that changed everything. "Ellie," he'd said, his voice raw with gratitude and exhaustion, "Grace adores you. She calls you abuela. Would you be her grandmother officially? She needs family, real family." And Eleanor, without hesitation, had said yes. The legal adoption had been quiet, practical. A few signatures, a notary stamp. From that day on, Grace Vasquez Carter became her granddaughter in every way that mattered. Except by blood. Robert sent updates, photographs, little drawings Grace made in school. Eleanor had helped with birthdays, with tuition, with those small, steady gestures that formed the language of love, but Natalie had never known. At 6, Natalie had bristled at sharing even a slice of attention. She'd thrown tantrums when Eleanor babysat Natober kids for extra money. How could Eleanor have explained that she'd given part of her heart and some of her resources to another child? So she didn't. She kept it separate. 2 lives, 2 worlds. Eleanor picked up a recent letter, its paper crisp and white. The handwriting was still neat, but softer now, warm with affection. Abuela Ellie, it began. I hope you know how much your support meant to me. Dad told me you helped pay for my college, even when it was hard for you. I'm a second-grade teacher now, and every day I try to show my students the same kindness you showed me. The kids love hearing about the woman who made the best tamales in the world. Eleanor pressed the page to her chest, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Here was a granddaughter who had never stopped writing, never stopped loving, who thanked her for every sacrifice, even the ones she never spoke of. Grace saw her worth. Grace cherished her. The shrill ring of the phone shattered the stillness. Eleanor glanced at the screen. Natalie. She hesitated, then answered. Mom, you left without saying goodbye, Natalie said. Her tone was sharp, threaded with annoyance rather than concern. Daniel's mother, asked where you went. It was embarrassing. Embarrassing? Eleanor's voice was calm, almost cold. Not worried, not concerned. Oh, don't be dramatic. You know we appreciate everything you do. We, not I love you, Mom, not you mean the world to me. Just a bland corporate we. I need to go, Eleanor said softly. Wait, next weekend, dinner at Daniel's parents'. Can you bring that enchilada casserole you make? They love it. The familiar script played on, and Eleanor could almost recite her lines by heart. But tonight she didn't read from that script. She ended the call without another word. The silence that followed was different. Not lonely, liberating. Eleanor reached for the folder marked estate planning and laid it open across the table. 3 months ago, her lawyer, Mr. Williams, had urged her to finalize her will. She'd postponed, telling herself there was no rush. But there was. And now, at last, she understood why. Tomorrow, everything would change. The night stretched long and silent, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the old refrigerator. Eleanor Carter sat at her kitchen table, a cooling cup of tea beside her, the estate folder open like a verdict waiting to be read. Outside, the street was dark, save for the occasional sweep of headlights cutting across her thin curtains. She traced the edges of the papers with a trembling finger, her heart pounding with the gravity of what she was about to do. Natalie's voice still echoed in her head, sharp as broken glass. She's only here because she paid for half the party. The word burrowed deep, lodging in places she didn't know could ache. It wasn't the money, it had never been about money. It was about dignity, about love freely given and respect withheld. Eleanor rose before dawn. The first light of morning spilled pale and cold across her kitchen floor. But inside her, a strange clarity burned bright. Today, she would stop postponing. Today, she would take control of her own story. By 7, she was showered and dressed in the same navy blue dress from Ethan's baptism. It felt symbolic, like wearing the armor from her last battle into the next. She fastened her pearl necklace with steady hands, glanced at her reflection, soft lines etched deep by years of sacrifice, and whispered to herself, no more waiting. The law office sat on the corner of Maple and Fifth, its brick facade framed by neatly trimmed hedges. Eleanor pushed through the heavy glass door just after 2, clutching the leather tote that held every piece of her life, letters from Grace, photographs, legal documents, and the will she intended to rewrite. The air inside smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish, the kind of scent that carried weight. Behind a mahogany desk sat Mr. Williams, a kind-eyed man in his 60s who had handled her late husband's affairs 15 years ago. He rose as she entered, offering a warm smile that almost unraveled her composure. Mrs. Carter, he said, gesturing to a chair. It's good to see you. You sounded determined on the phone. I am, she replied, lowering herself into the seat. Yesterday changed everything. His brows lifted slightly, but he didn't press. Instead, he folded his hands and waited. Eleanor drew a deep breath, her fingers brushing over Grace's letters before laying them on the desk like evidence in a trial. Mr. Williams, I need to make significant changes to my estate plan, effective immediately. He glanced at the letters, then back at her, curiosity tempered by professionalism. Significant how? I want everything, the house on Maple Street, the savings account, my life insurance policy, to go to Grace Vasquez Carter. Her voice did not waver. All of it. He leaned back, studying her with the quiet patience of a man who had heard confessions disguised as legal instructions before. Mrs. Carter, I have to ask, are you making this decision out of anger? Estate planning done in emotional moments sometimes leads to regret. She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. This isn't anger, Mr. Williams. This is clarity. For 35 years, I've given everything I had to my daughter. Her quinceañera, college tuition, wedding, half the cost of that baptism yesterday. A bitter laugh slipped out, sharp and fragile. And in return, she sat me with the custodian and told people I was there because I paid for the party. He said nothing, simply nodded for her to continue. Grace, Eleanor whispered, her fingers curling over the edges of those cherished letters, writes me every month. Real letters on paper, not texts asking for favors. She thanks me for things I never told her I sacrificed for. She tells me about her students, her children, her life. She sees me as family, not as a bank account with legs. Silence lingered in the room, thick and heavy. Finally, Mr. Williams nodded. Very well. If that's your wish, I'll prepare the documents. For the next 2 hours, Eleanor signed and initialed, her name flowing across page after page like the closing lines of a long, unfinished story. With each signature, the weight on her chest lightened, replaced by something that felt almost like peace. When the last page lay before her, she hesitated only a moment before speaking. There's one more thing. Yes? I want the house transferred to Grace now, not when I die. Immediately. His brows lifted higher this time. That's a significant step. Where will you live? Eleanor smiled, a small, fierce curve of her lips. Grace told me the apartment above her garage is empty. She said she could use the help with her mortgage, and I could use a home where I'm wanted. This transfer will have tax implications, and your daughter will find out as soon as the county updates the records. Good, Eleanor said softly. Let her learn from the clerk instead of from me. By 5 o'clock, it was done. The house on Maple Street no longer belonged to her. It belonged to Grace, the granddaughter who had loved her without condition for nearly 3 decades. Before leaving the office, Eleanor called Grace. Her voice trembled only once, when she told her everything. About Natalie, about the humiliation, about the decision that had taken a lifetime to make. On the other end of the line, Grace's voice broke. Abuela Ellie, are you sure? I'm sure, mija. I'm doing this because I finally see things clearly. You've been my granddaughter for 28 years. It's time the world knew it. Then come home, Grace whispered, her voice thick with tears. Come home where you belong. Eleanor stepped out of the office into the fading light, clutching copies of the signed documents in her tote. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel like a woman nearing the end of her life. She felt like someone beginning again. Tomorrow she would start packing. Tonight she would savor the quiet triumph humming in her bones. The knock came hard and fast, rattling the old wooden door like a storm demanding entry. Eleanor Carter smoothed the front of her dress and took one last glance at her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her pulse thudded, steady now, like the drumbeat of resolve. When she opened the door, Natalie stood there, flushed, frantic, gripping a crumpled piece of paper that bore the seal of the county clerk. Her hair, usually sleek and polished, clung to her temples in messy strands. What the hell is this? Natalie's voice cracked like a whip as she shoved the paper toward Eleanor. It says you transferred the house to someone named Grace Vasquez Carter. Who is that? What have you done? Eleanor stepped aside calmly. Come in, Natalie. Natalie stormed past her, heels stabbing against the hardwood, every movement vibrating with fury. You're out of your mind. This has to be a mistake. You'd never... It's no mistake, Eleanor said evenly as she closed the door. Sit down. Sit down! I want answers, Mom! Natalie's voice pitched high, almost hysterical. Who is Grace? Why would you give her everything? You've lost it. You've completely— Grace, Eleanor interrupted, her tone quiet but firm, is your sister. The words hit the air like a gunshot. Natalie froze mid-step, her face blanching, as if the blood had been drained from her veins. My— what? Her voice was barely a whisper. Your sister, Eleanor repeated, though softer now. Well, technically your niece, but I've raised her as my granddaughter for nearly 3 decades. For a long, breathless moment, Natalie stared at her, lip parted in disbelief. Then she laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that scraped against the silence. No, you're making this up. This is some twisted way of punishing me for— what? For not seating you next to the photographer yesterday? This isn't about yesterday. Eleanor walked to the hall closet, retrieved the old shoebox, and placed it on the kitchen table. She lifted the lid with deliberate grace, as if unveiling evidence in a courtroom. And it's about the truth. It's about 30 years of it. Natalie watched, her anger faltering, confusion seeping through the cracks. Eleanor spread the letters across the table, photographs sliding free like ghosts from the past. Grace at her high school graduation, her wedding day, her arms around 2 small children with bright brown eyes. Grace Vasquez Carter, Eleanor said, her voice steady. Your father was gone by then. I was working as a caregiver for a family in crisis. Robert Vasquez, Grace's father, was fighting to keep custody after his wife abandoned them. Grace was 3, Natalie, 3 years old, and she called me abuela. She needed me. Natalie's fingers curled into fists at her sides. And you chose her over me. No, Eleanor said sharply, the word cutting through the room. I chose both of you. I supported you financially and emotionally for decades. But Grace, she needed stability. I gave her what I could without taking from you. Without taking from me. Natalie's laugh broke like glass. You've been lying to me my entire life. You've been hiding her. Her voice trembled, rising with every word. While I was your only child, your only blood. Eleanor took a step closer, her own voice tightening. Blood doesn't guarantee love, Natalie. Respect does. Kindness does. And you— She paused, the weight of years pressing against her chest. You haven't shown me either in a long time. Natalie's face flushed crimson. Oh, here we go, the martyr speech. I'm such a terrible daughter because I wanted a better life, because I wanted to fit in with Daniel's family instead of dragging you like— She stopped herself, too late. Say it, Eleanor said softly. Instead of dragging me like what? Natalie swallowed hard, but the truth spilled out anyway, like some poor old woman who doesn't belong in their world. The words hung in the air, toxic and unyielding. Eleanor felt them like a slap, yet her voice remained calm. You're ashamed of me. Natalie's eyes shimmered with panic. That's not— It is. Eleanor turned away, reached for a photo of Grace laughing in the sunlight, a child on each hip. Do you know what Grace calls me? Her anchor, her safe place. She never cared that I couldn't give her designer dresses or country club memberships. She cared that I showed up. Eleanor's eyes lifted, locking onto Natalie's. When's the last time you called me without asking for money or a favor? When's the last time you asked how I'm doing? Natalie's lips trembled, but no sound came. Yesterday, Eleanor continued, her voice quiet but sharp, you seated me near the kitchen with strangers and told people I was there because I paid for the party. Grace would have saved me the seat beside her. Grace would have introduced me as her beloved grandmother. Natalie's tears spilled then, streaking black mascara down her cheeks. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? Eleanor's question sliced clean through the fragile silence. Natalie crumpled into a chair, her sobs muffled against trembling hands. I wanted Daniel's family to respect me. And for that, Eleanor said, her voice steady as stone, you sacrificed respecting me. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden. Both women turned. Through the window, Eleanor saw a rental car in the driveway. Her heart lifted in her chest, steadying her like a lifeline. That's Grace, she said, smoothing her skirt. She came to help me pack. Natalie shot to her feet, her expression spiraling from shock to raw, unfiltered rage. You're not done with me. Yes, Eleanor said simply, her hand on the doorknob. I am. The door swung open and there stood Grace, her arms wide, her smile tender, her eyes brimming with tears. And for the first time in years, Eleanor Carter stepped into an embrace that felt like home. Grace's arms wrapped around Eleanor with a warmth that unraveled the tension in her bones. For a moment, Eleanor let herself sink into that embrace, the kind of embrace that didn't ask for anything, that spoke only of love freely given. "Abuela," Grace whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Are you all right? You sounded so upset on the phone." "I'm better now," Eleanor murmured, her hand resting on Grace's shoulder. "Now that you're here." Behind them, a sharp intake of breath shattered the fragile calm. Eleanor turned. Natalie stood frozen in the hallway, mascara streaking her cheeks, eyes burning with something darker than anger. "So," Natalie said, her tone cutting like ice, "this is her, the daughter you chose over me." Grace stiffened, confusion flashing across her face. "Abuela, what is she talking about?" "Grace," Eleanor began softly, stepping back. "This is Natalie, my biological daughter." Grace blinked, stunned, then offered a tentative smile and extended her hand. "It's nice to finally meet you. Abuela has told me so much about you." Natalie didn't take the hand. Her laugh was jagged, brittle. "Has she? Funny? Because she never mentioned you? Not once. Not in 28 years. "Natalie, please, don't," Natalie snapped, her voice shaking with fury and hurt. "Don't tell me to calm down. You've been living a double life, Mom. And for what? For her?" She turned on Grace, her words like shards of glass. "Do you have any idea what she's done? Do you know she gave you my house?" Grace's eyes widened. "What?" "Yes," Natalie hissed. "Everything. The house, the money, every bit of security I was supposed to have. Gone. Handed to some woman who doesn't even share her blood." "Enough!" Eleanor's voice rang out, sharper than either of them had ever heard. The room fell silent. "Grace is not some woman. She is family. Blood doesn't make family, Natalie. Love does. Respect does. And you?" Eleanor's breath trembled, but her gaze stayed steady. "You haven't shown me either in a very long time." Natalie's hands balled into fists. "You're punishing me because I embarrassed you yesterday. Over seating arrangements? Are you insane?" "This isn't about yesterday," Eleanor said, her voice low and fierce. "It's about every time you treated me like an accessory you could hide when it didn't suit your image. It's about years of being useful. Never valued." Natalie's laugh broke, harsh and uneven. "You think this is my fault? You think I wanted a mother who couldn't blend in, who made me feel like an outsider every time I introduced you to Daniel's family? Do you know the pressure I'm under? His mother wears designer everything, Mom. She belongs to a country club. And then there's you." Her voice cracked, but the words spilled out anyway. "You show up in thrift store clothes and an accent so thick everyone stares." "Enough." Eleanor's voice sliced through like a blade. "You're ashamed of me. Say it." Natalie's chest rose and fell in sharp bursts. "Maybe I am. Maybe I didn't want them to see how poor I grew up. Is that a crime? I wanted better." "You wanted their approval more than you wanted my dignity." Eleanor's words landed heavy, deliberate, and yesterday proved it. Grace stepped forward then, her tone calm but firm. "You're wrong about one thing, Natalie. Abuela never abandoned you. She talked about you all the time. She showed me pictures, your graduation, your wedding. She was proud of you, even when you forgot to be proud of her." Natalie's head snapped toward Grace, eyes flashing. "Don't you dare act like you know me. You stole her from me." "I didn't steal anything," Grace said, her voice soft but unwavering. "She gave me love. The same love you threw away because it didn't look expensive enough." Natalie's face crumpled. Tears spilled, black rivers streaking down her cheeks. "I didn't throw it away. I needed more." Eleanor's heart ached at that, but she didn't bend. "More at the cost of me." The silence that followed was thick, pulsing with everything unsaid. And then Eleanor broke it, not with softness, but with steel. "There's something else you need to know." Natalie's head jerked up. "What now?" "Daniel," Eleanor said, her voice cold as winter, "isn't the man you think he is." Natalie laughed bitterly through her tears. "What are you talking about?" 3 weeks ago, he called me by mistake. I heard him talking to someone, Rebecca Chen, about meeting her at the usual hotel in Seattle. I recorded the call. Eleanor held up her phone like a dagger. Do you want me to play it? Natalie's face drained of color. You're lying. I'm not. Eleanor's voice was merciless now. Ask him yourself, or don't. Either way, Rebecca knows him better than you do. For a moment, the only sound was Natalie's ragged breathing. Then her purse slipped from her shoulder, landing on the floor with a hollow thud. This isn't real, she whispered. It can't be. It is, Eleanor said. Your marriage, your image, your perfect life. It was built on sand, and you ignored the one person who would have stood beside you through anything. Natalie's sob broke free then, raw and guttural. She sank into a chair, clutching her face as if trying to hold herself together. Grace knelt beside Eleanor, her hand sliding into hers, anchoring her. The front door loomed just beyond the kitchen, glowing faintly from the porch light outside. Eleanor looked at it and felt something inside her shift. A door closing, another opening. Pack your things, Grace whispered. It's time to come home. And for the first time in years, Eleanor believed her. The highway stretched like a ribbon through the Colorado plains, the late afternoon sun dipping low, painting the horizon in gold and rose. Eleanor Carter sat in the passenger seat of Grace's SUV, her hands folded in her lap, the worn leather tote resting at her feet. Inside were the last remnants of her old life, documents, photographs, a few pieces of jewelry. Everything else she'd left behind. Grace glanced at her from time to time, her smile soft, reassuring. You doing okay, Abuela? Eleanor turned toward her granddaughter and felt the corners of her lips curve into something unfamiliar, something close to peace. Better than I've been in years, mija. The words were true. For the first time in decades, Eleanor wasn't heading toward loneliness. She was heading home. When they pulled into the driveway, twilight had settled like a velvet cloak over the neighborhood. The house stood warm and welcoming, lights glowing through sheer curtains, a wreath of fresh flowers hanging on the front door. Beyond the garage, Eleanor saw a small staircase leading up to the apartment Grace had promised. Potted plants lined the steps, their blossoms nodding gently in the evening breeze. Before Eleanor could gather her things, the front door burst open and two small figures darted out, laughter spilling into the night. Grandma Ellie! The little girl, Bella, threw herself into Eleanor's arms before she'd even stepped out of the car. Eleanor staggered slightly, then held her close, inhaling the sweet scent of shampoo and childhood. A boy, taller, with dark hair and bright eyes, hung back shyly for a moment before stepping forward. I'm Michael, he said, his voice soft but steady. Eleanor crouched to meet his gaze, her hands cupping his cheeks. And I'm so lucky to finally meet you. Grace stood behind them, watching with tears glistening in her eyes. Kids, let Abuela breathe. She's been on the road all day. But Eleanor didn't mind. She let Bella tug her toward the porch, her small hand warm and insistent, while Michael carried her bag with quiet pride. The scent of grilled meat drifted from the backyard, mingling with the earthy perfume of blooming jasmine. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Belonging. Dinner was a lively chaos of voices, laughter, and clinking silverware. Grace's husband, David, greeted Eleanor with a handshake that turned into a gentle hug. He was a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and an easy smile, the kind that made strangers feel like family. We've been waiting for this day, he said warmly as he helped her to a seat at the long wooden table. Grace talks about you all the time. And the kids, well, they've been counting down. Eleanor's throat tightened as she looked around the table. No one treated her like an obligation. No one spoke to her as though her worth was measured in dollar signs. Here, she wasn't a prop for appearances. She was family. As they ate, Bella chattered about school, her voice bright as birdsong. Michael, more reserved, asked thoughtful questions about Eleanor's life. What her favorite food was, what books she liked to read. Tamales, Eleanor said with a smile, and I'll teach you how to make them if you promise not to burn the kitchen down. Bella giggled. We'll try. After dinner, while David cleared the dishes and Grace tucked the children into bed, Eleanor stepped out onto the back porch. The night air was cool, scented with pine and fresh-cut grass. Above her, a canopy of stars stretched across the sky, vast and eternal. She wrapped her arms around herself and breathed deeply, letting the quiet seep into her bones. For so long she had lived with noise, the sharp clatter of Natalie's demands, the constant hum of guilt, the aching echo of loneliness. Here, the silence felt different. It felt like peace. Grace joined her a few minutes later, carrying 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. She handed one to Eleanor, then leaned against the railing, her face aglow in the soft porch light. "Thank you," Grace said simply. "For what, mija?" "For trusting me, for letting me love you the way you deserve to be loved." Eleanor's throat closed around the lump rising there. She reached out, her hand covering Grace's. "You've given me more than love, Grace. You've given me a home." They sipped their tea in companionable silence, watching fireflies spark and fade in the darkness. Somewhere inside, the children's laughter drifted down the hallway like a lullaby, and for the first time in years, Eleanor imagined a future worth living, a future filled with family dinners, shared holidays, and quiet evenings like this one. Still, a shadow lingered at the edges of her mind, a voice, sharp and trembling, echoing from the past. "You're not done with me." Natalie's words had been laced with fury, but also something else, desperation. Eleanor pushed the thought aside. Tonight wasn't for regrets. Tonight was for beginnings. When she finally climbed the narrow stairs to the garage apartment, she found the space freshly painted, a vase of daisies on the small table by the window. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed, its stitching neat and careful, every square whispering Grace's thoughtfulness. Eleanor sank onto the mattress, her body aching from the day, but her spirit lighter than it had been in years. Through the open window, the night air flowed in, carrying the sound of crickets and the faint murmur of Grace and David's voices below. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel like a burden. She didn't feel invisible. She felt, finally, fully home. As she drifted towards sleep, a single thought glowed steady and warm. Love like this was worth everything she'd given up, and everything she had left. The wind whispered through the tall pines, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers. Eleanor Carter knelt in the garden, her knees pressing into the soft soil as she guided a tomato seedling into its new home. Michael crouched beside her, brows furrowed in concentration, his small fingers gently patting down the dirt. "Like that, abuela?" he asked. "Perfect, mijo," Eleanor said, smiling at the earnestness in his dark eyes. "Not too tight, not too loose. The roots need room to breathe." Laughter floated across the yard from where Bella sat cross-legged, arranging marigold seedlings into neat rows. The sun slanted low, drenching everything in honeyed light. And for a moment, Eleanor thought, this is what peace feels like. Then her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She wiped her hands on a rag before pulling it out, squinting against the glare on the screen. The name flashing there made her breath catch in her throat. Natalie. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. It had been months, 6, maybe more, since she'd last heard her daughter's voice. At first, the calls had come in a relentless tide, angry, pleading, desperate. Eleanor had stopped answering after the third time. Natalie screamed that she was a bitter old woman destroying her family. Then the silence came. A silence Eleanor welcomed, even as it gnawed at some fragile, unspoken place inside her. She stared at the phone until the ringing stopped. A moment later, a voicemail notification appeared. Her thumb hovered, hesitated, then pressed play. "Mom." Natalie's voice was different, smaller, quieter, stripped of its usual steel. "I know you probably won't call me back, but I wanted you to know Ethan took his first steps yesterday. 14 months old and running already." A shaky laugh. "He's into everything. I thought you'd want to know." The message ended, leaving Eleanor staring at the darkened screen, her throat tight, her heart aching in ways she didn't want to name. No demands, no guilt, just a mother sharing a milestone like any daughter might. "Abuela?" Bella's voice pulled her back. The little girl was watching her with curious eyes. "Aren't you going to answer it?" "Not right now, mija," Eleanor said softly, tucking the phone back into her apron. "These plants need our attention." Bella seemed satisfied with that and turned back to her marigolds. Michael kept working quietly, his small hands steady in the dirt. But Eleanor's thoughts churned like dark water beneath a calm surface. When the last seedling was in place, they rinsed their hands at the outdoor spigot, laughing as Bella splashed water at her brother and got sprayed in return. The sound of their giggles rose like bird song into the evening air. Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling at the simple joy of it. Yet deep down, something twisted, a thread of longing she hadn't felt in months. Later, after the children had been tucked into bed and the house had settled into the hush of night, Eleanor carried 2 mugs of tea to the porch where Grace was folding laundry. The scent of chamomile curled up into the cool air as they sat side by side, the sky above them jeweled with stars. "You're quiet tonight," Grace said gently. "Everything okay?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded toward the phone in her lap. Natalie called. Grace's hand stilled over a neatly folded shirt. "What did she say?" "She left a message." Eleanor's voice was low, almost lost in the sound of crickets. "Ethan took his first steps." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Grace reached over, her fingers curling around Eleanor's hand. "Do you want to call her back?" Eleanor stared out at the dark yard where fireflies pulsed like tiny lanterns. She thought of Ethan, wobbling on unsteady legs, reaching for something just out of his grasp. She thought of Natalie, maybe watching him with pride and a hollow ache she didn't know how to fill. "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "Part of me wants to. Part of me can't forget." Grace squeezed her hand. "You don't have to decide tonight, or ever, if it hurts too much." Eleanor turned to look at her granddaughter, this woman who had asked for nothing and given everything, who had made room for her in both her home and her heart. And in that moment, Eleanor knew one thing with unshakable certainty. Love wasn't measured in blood or obligation. It was measured in presence, in kindness, in every small, quiet act that said, "You matter." "I'm right where I need to be," Eleanor whispered. Grace smiled, her eyes glistening in the starlight. "Then that's all that matters." They sat in silence, sipping their tea, listening to the soft hum of night. Inside, the children's laughter lingered like a melody that refused to fade, wrapping Eleanor in its gentle refrain. Her phone buzzed again. A text this time. "Mom, please, just 5 minutes." Eleanor read the words, her breath catching, her heart tilting under the weight of them. She thought of bridges, how some could be rebuilt, plank by plank, if both sides were willing to meet in the middle. But some had burned too completely. She set the phone face down on the table, lifted her mug, and let the warmth seep into her palms. Outside, the fireflies flickered like tiny stars, lighting a world that felt new, a world she had chosen. The evening settled over the house like a warm quilt, stitched together with soft laughter and the scent of something sweet baking in Grace's kitchen. Eleanor Carter sat on the small porch outside her apartment, a shawl draped over her shoulders, watching the last light fade from the horizon. Down below, the glow of the kitchen window framed Grace's silhouette as she moved about with quiet purpose, her voice carrying in gentle waves as she spoke to David. Eleanor closed her eyes and breathed in the mountain air. It was cool and clean, touched with pine and the distant hum of crickets. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, her body didn't ache with exhaustion. Not from work, not from worry. This was what peace tasted like. Chamomile tea cooling on the table beside her, the muted giggles of Michael and Bella echoing from their bedrooms, the knowledge that tomorrow held nothing but simple, ordinary joys. Her phone buzzed against the wooden railing. Eleanor hesitated, expecting Natalie's name again, but instead the screen lit with something unexpected. Robert Vasquez. For a moment she simply stared. It had been months since they last spoke, maybe longer. And yet, his name tugged at something deep inside, pulling her back to a time when everything had begun, when saying yes to a frightened little girl had changed the course of her life. She answered on the third ring. "Robert?" His voice was warm, rich with familiarity. "Grace told me you've moved to Denver. How are you settling in?" Eleanor smiled despite herself. "Better than I imagined. The kids, they've stolen my heart." "They always had room for you," Robert said softly. "Grace told me how much they love having you there. And I can't tell you how much it means to me, Ellie, after everything you've done for her." Emotion thickened Eleanor's throat, but she forced her voice steady. "She made it easy. Grace is everything I hoped she'd become." There was a pause, filled with the hum of connection that distance could never erode. I heard about Natalie, Robert said finally. Grace mentioned things have been complicated. Eleanor let out a breath that felt heavy with years. Complicated is a polite word for it. I'm sorry, he murmured. I know what she meant to you. She still means something, Eleanor admitted. But love doesn't erase damage. And some things can't be mended overnight. Robert's voice softened even more. If you ever want to try, Ellie, if you ever feel ready, I want you to know something. There's room here. For her too. The words stunned her. She gripped the phone tighter, her pulse thrumming in her ears. Robert? I mean it, he continued gently. Family isn't about keeping score. It's about making space. If she ever wants to visit, if you want that, I'd welcome it. Grace would too. The kids, they'd think it was an adventure. Family is family, Ellie. There's always room for more love. Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes, hot and unbidden. She turned her face toward the dark yard, where fireflies sparked like tiny lanterns against the night. You always were better at forgiveness than I was. It's not forgiveness, Robert said. It's hope, and it's choice. You taught Grace that love is a choice, Ellie. Maybe now it's yours. They talked for an hour about Grace's classroom, about Bella's fascination with butterflies, about Michael's dream of building a treehouse big enough for all his friends. Ordinary things, simple and good. The kind of conversation Eleanor had once longed to have with Natalie but never could. When they finally said goodnight, Eleanor sat in the quiet, staring at the stars scattered like silver coins across the velvet sky. Robert's words lingered, weaving themselves into the fabric of her thoughts. There's always room for more love. She picked up her phone, thumb hovering over Natalie's name. She pictured her daughter as a child, brown curls sticking to her forehead after a summer rain, eyes bright with mischief and need. She remembered the way Natalie used to curl against her on stormy nights, whispering secrets into the hollow of her neck. She remembered, too, the woman who stood in her kitchen weeks ago, voice trembling with rage, spitting words that cut like glass. Eleanor closed her eyes. Bridges could be rebuilt, but only when both sides were ready. And right now, she didn't know if Natalie was ready. She didn't know if she was. The door creaked softly behind her. Grace stepped out, her hair loose, a dish towel slung over one shoulder. Kids are asleep, she whispered, settling into the chair beside her. You okay? Eleanor smiled faintly, swiping at the dampness in her eyes. I was just thinking about how lucky I am. Grace reached over, taking her hand, warm and steady. We're the lucky ones, abuela. Eleanor squeezed her fingers gently, letting the truth of that settle in her bones. For now, that was enough. Tomorrow could bring what it would. Inside the house, a light flicked off, leaving the yard awash in starlight. Eleanor lifted her gaze to the sky and breathed deep, the night air cool against her skin. For the first time in years, her heart didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like an open door. And though she wasn't sure who or what might walk through, she knew this. She would meet it with Grace. Morning sunlight spilled across the small porch, painting the wooden planks in shades of gold. Eleanor Carter sat in her favorite wicker chair, a steaming cup of coffee cradled between her palms. The air was cool, sweet with the scent of dew and lilacs drifting from Grace's garden below. Inside, faint sounds of life stirred, a child's laugh, the murmur of a television. But here, in this quiet corner, time felt suspended. 18 months had passed since the day she left her old life behind, yet the memory of that day still lingered like a shadow on the edge of sunlight. A year and a half of mornings filled with warmth instead of silence. Family dinners alive with laughter, afternoons teaching Bella to fold tamales, evenings when Michael sat at the kitchen table sketching treehouse plans as if they were blueprints for a new world. And still, there were moments, like this one, when her phone buzzed and her heart faltered. It lay on the table now, the screen lit with a familiar name. Natalie. The call went unanswered, like so many before it. A voicemail icon bloomed in its place. Eleanor hesitated before pressing play, her breath caught in her chest. Mom, Natalie's voice came, soft and hesitant, stripped of the sharp edges that once cut so deep. I don't know if you'll ever call me back, but Ethan asked about you today. He's talking so much now. He says grandma like he knows you. I showed him pictures. I told him stories. I wanted you to know that. A pause heavy with something like longing. Then, I miss you, I'm sorry. The message ended, leaving Eleanor staring at the mountains etched against the horizon, their peaks gilded by morning light. For a long time, she didn't move. Her fingers curled loosely around the coffee mug as her heart pulled in two directions, toward the voice of the daughter she once knew, and toward the laughter echoing faintly from inside the home that had become her sanctuary. She thought of Ethan wobbling on toddler legs, words spilling clumsily from his lips. She imagined his eyes, Natalie's eyes, bright with questions he didn't yet know how to ask. The ache that rose in her chest was sharp, insistent, tempered only by the truth she'd come to understand. Love was not a debt to be paid. It was a choice renewed each day. Buela! Bella's voice burst through the stillness, followed by the patter of small feet. The little girl appeared in the doorway, hair tumbling in a wild halo, her nightgown dotted with cartoon stars. We're making pancakes. Michael says you have to flip the first one because you're the champion. Eleanor laughed, the sound rich and full, chasing the last shadows from her heart. Is that so? Yes. Bella tugged at her hand, urgency shining in her eyes. Come on before he eats them all. Eleanor let herself be led inside past the sunlit living room and into the kitchen where Grace stood at the stove, spatula in hand, her smile warm as morning. Michael perched on a chair beside the counter, mixing batter with fierce concentration. There she is, Grace said, her voice threaded with affection. Ready to show us how it's done? Eleanor slid off her shawl, rolled up her sleeves, and took the spatula. The skillet hissed softly as the first pancake browned, the air thick with the sweet scent of vanilla and butter. Bella hovered close, clapping her hands when Eleanor flipped it perfectly on the first try. Laughter spilled through the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wrapped around Eleanor, warm and unyielding, a reminder that family wasn't something you inherited. It was something you built, choice by choice, moment by moment. Later, after breakfast, she returned to the porch. The phone still lay on the table, Natalie's voicemail waiting like an unopened door. Eleanor picked it up, thumb hovering over the screen. For a heartbeat, she imagined pressing call. Imagined Natalie's voice trembling on the other end. Imagined bridges rebuilt plank by plank. But she set the phone down gently. Not today. Maybe someday. When both of them were ready to meet in the middle. When love could live without conditions or wounds. For now, Eleanor had everything she needed. A home that rang with laughter. Arms that welcomed without judgment. A life stitched with peace instead of pretense. She rose, smoothing the front of her sweater, and stepped into the hum of voices inside. Dawami, the scent of pancakes lingering like a promise, the sound of Bella's giggles spilling like music. And as the door closed behind her, the mountains stood silent and eternal beyond the glass, bearing witness to a truth Eleanor had learned too late, but not too late to live. Family is not defined by blood. Family is who stays. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in Eleanor's place, would you call Natalie back or let her go? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to follow for more stories like this.